They laughed at the 72-year-old man in worn-out jeans trying to fix a Ferrari that 5 expert mechanics said was impossible to repair. The billionaire filmed him for his 300,000 social media followers, turning him into a viral joke. But nobody knew that those wrinkled hands had designed that exact engine. And when the truth came out, it destroyed everything the billionaire had built. This is a true story about dignity, justice, and how one quiet man brought down an empire without raising his voice. And I promise you, by the time you reach the end, you'll never judge anyone by their appearance again. Stay with me, because what happened next will give you chills. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know, sometimes life has a funny way of bringing the right person to the right place at exactly the right time. This is one of those stories. And I promise you, by the end of it, you'll understand why I had to share it with you. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, when everything changed for a man named George Martinez. George was 72 years old, with hands that told the story of a lifetime of honest work. Deep lines creased his brown face, and his hair had gone completely gray years ago. But his eyes were still sharp and clear. George had driven his beat-up 1997 Chevy truck across town for one simple reason: to pick up his granddaughter, Maria, from her job. Maria worked as a receptionist at Sterling Luxury Auto, one of those fancy car dealerships where the salespeople wear suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But here's the thing about old trucks: they break down. And George's truck decided that the front entrance of Sterling Luxury Auto was the perfect place to give up the ghost. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died right there in the circular driveway, blocking the entrance where wealthy customers usually pulled up in their expensive cars. George climbed out of his truck, his work boots heavy on the pavement. He wore simple jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, both clean but worn from years of washing. He popped the hood and started looking at the engine, trying to figure out what went wrong. That's when he heard the laughter. Well, what do we have here? The voice belonged to David Sterling, the owner of the dealership. David was 45 years old, tall, with perfect hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had inherited the dealership from his father and spent most of his time showing off his wealth on social media. Today, he saw an opportunity for entertainment. "Ladies and gentlemen," David called out loudly, pulling out his phone to start recording. "Come see this. We've got ourselves a real expert mechanic here." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Salespeople started gathering. A few customers stopped to watch. Someone else started filming too. George didn't respond. He just kept looking at his engine, trying to stay focused. But David wasn't done. "You know what?" David said, his voice getting louder, making sure everyone could hear. "I'll tell you what. You see that red Ferrari over there in the corner?" He pointed across the lot to a completely destroyed sports car that looked like it had been through a war. "I'll give you that Ferrari completely free if you can get it to run." The laughter from the crowd got louder. Someone whistled. Another person shouted, "This is going to be good." That Ferrari had been sitting in the corner of the lot for months. It had been in a terrible accident, and 5 different mechanics had already looked at it. Every single one of them said the same thing: the car was totaled. The engine was blown, the electrical system was fried, and the frame was bent. It was basically a very expensive pile of red metal. David kept his phone camera pointed at George. "What do you say, old man? Think you can handle it? Or should I call a tow truck for your vehicle?" More laughter. George slowly turned to look at the wrecked Ferrari. He walked toward it, ignoring the comments and the phone cameras following his every move. When he got close to the destroyed car, something changed in his face. His eyes narrowed just a little bit, like he was seeing something nobody else could see. "Sir," George said quietly, "may I take a closer look at that car? Be my guest." David practically shouted, waving his arm dramatically. "Everyone, make sure you're recording this. This is going to be incredible content." What David didn't know, what nobody there knew, was that George Martinez wasn't just some random old man who didn't understand fancy cars. Those calloused hands had built some of the most powerful engines in the world. But we'll get to that. As George approached the Ferrari, the crowd grew larger. A salesman named Tyler, who was about 30 years old with slick-back hair and an expensive watch, decided to join in the fun. "Hey buddy," Tyler called out. "If this doesn't work out, my uncle owns a tire shop. I can probably get you a job changing oil or something." The crowd loved that one. People were laughing so hard some of them had tears in their eyes. They were sharing the videos in real time, adding hashtags like hashtag #oldmanthinkshe's and hashtag Ferrari impossible. But George didn't react. He just knelt down next to the Ferrari, his knees cracking a little as he got down on the ground. He started examining the engine with a focus that seemed almost out of place given all the noise and mockery around him. Inside the dealership, Maria Martinez had just come back from her lunch break. She saw the crowd gathered outside and felt her stomach drop. She pushed through the people and saw her grandfather kneeling by that destroyed Ferrari, while everyone laughed and filmed. Her face went pale. She had worked at Sterling Luxury Auto for 3 years, and she knew exactly what kind of man David Sterling was. She knew he enjoyed making people feel small. And now he had chosen her grandfather as his target. Maria wanted to run out there and stop it. She wanted to tell everyone who her grandfather really was. But something held her back. Maybe it was the calm, focused look on George's face. Maybe it was the lifetime of wisdom she'd learned from him. She decided to wait and watch. Because if there was one thing Maria knew about her grandfather, it was this. George Martinez never did anything without a reason. What started as David Sterling's 5-minute joke turned into something much worse. An hour passed, and George was still working on that Ferrari while the crowd continued to grow. More customers stopped. More phones came out. The videos were spreading across social media like wildfire. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced to his growing audience, now broadcasting live on Instagram to his 300,000 followers, "We are now 1 full hour into this adventure. And our friend here still believes he can fix a car that professional mechanics said was impossible to repair. I have to admire the dedication, even if it's completely misguided." The comments on the live stream were brutal. People were making jokes about George's age, his clothes, his old truck. Some comments were even worse than that, bringing race into it in ways that made Maria feel sick to her stomach as she watched from inside. But George kept working. His hands moved across the engine with a kind of precision that some of the more observant people were starting to notice. These weren't the fumbling movements of someone who was guessing. These were the confident, practiced movements of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Mr. Sterling," one of the older customers said quietly, "are you sure this is a good idea? That man seems to actually know what he's—" "Oh, come on, Robert," David interrupted with a laugh. "Don't tell me you're falling for this. He's putting on a show. Trust me, in about 10 minutes, he's going to give up and slink away. That's what always happens with these people. These people." The words hung in the air like poison. Tyler, the salesman, decided to push things further. He walked over with a bottle of water and set it down near George with exaggerated care, like he was dealing with someone fragile. "Here you go, sir," Tyler said in a voice dripping with fake concern. "Wouldn't want you to get dehydrated. At your age, you really need to be careful." Some people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. This was starting to feel less like entertainment and more like cruelty. But nobody spoke up. Nobody stopped it. George accepted the water with a quiet thank you and kept working. He had removed several panels from the Ferrari now, examining components with intense focus. At one point, he paused and stared at something for a long time. His expression changed, just for a moment, and Maria saw it from where she stood inside. She knew that look. It was the look her grandfather got when he solved a difficult puzzle. When he figured something out that nobody else had seen. 2 hours in, George finally stood up. His knees cracked, and he stretched his back slowly. The crowd had thinned out a little. Some people had gotten bored and left, but David was still there, still filming, still smiling that cold smile. "Well," David said, "ready to admit defeat? It's okay, old man. Nobody expected you to actually." "Mr. Sterling," George interrupted quietly, "could I ask you a question?" David's smile flickered. Something in George's tone was different now. There was a weight to his words that hadn't been there before. "Sure," David said, trying to sound amused but not quite pulling it off. "Have you ever built something with your own hands?" George asked, looking directly at him. "Something that existed only in your mind, and you had to make it real through your own work, your own sweat, your own dedication?" The question caught David completely off guard. I built a business empire," he said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "No," George said softly. "That's not building. That's inheriting and managing. Building is different. Building is when you start with nothing but an idea and raw materials, and you create something that never existed before." An uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd. Even the people watching the live stream seemed to sense that something had shifted. The comments started changing. "Wait, who is this guy?" someone typed. "He doesn't sound like a random old man," wrote another. George turned back to the Ferrari. "Mr. Sterling, this engine wasn't destroyed in an accident." "What?" David's laugh sounded forced now. "That's ridiculous. There was a police report, insurance investigation, everything." "I'm sure there was," George said calmly, pointing to a specific part of the engine. "But investigations miss things, especially when they don't know what to look for." He traced his finger along a wire. This wire was cut deliberately, then burned to make it look like overheating. And here, he pointed to another component. These are torque marks. They only appear when someone manually forces a part to break. Several people leaned in closer now, genuinely curious. Even to people who didn't know much about cars, the evidence George was pointing to looked suspicious. "This is insane," David said, but his voice had gone up an octave. "You can't just make accusations like that. You don't know anything about this car." "Actually," George said, standing up to his full height and looking David straight in the eye, "I know everything about this car. Because I designed the engine." The words dropped like a bomb. Several people gasped. Tyler's smug smile vanished completely. David's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. "What did you just say?" someone in the crowd asked. George reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he took out a worn business card and held it up for everyone to see. George Martinez, Senior Engine Design Engineer, Ferrari North America, retired. 43 years of service. This specific engine, serial number F219GM 448, I designed it in April 2019. The GM in the serial number stands for George Martinez. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. David Sterling stood frozen, his phone still recording, capturing the exact moment his world started to fall apart. Maria felt tears spring to her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride so fierce it almost hurt. You could have heard a pin drop in that parking lot. Everyone stood completely still, trying to process what they had just heard. The man they had been laughing at for 2 hours wasn't some clueless old guy. He was a master engineer who had spent more than 4 decades designing some of the most advanced engines in the world. George pulled out his cell phone, an old flip phone that got a few chuckles from the crowd, but quieter ones now. He dialed a number from memory and put it on speaker. The phone rang 3 times. Then a voice answered, speaking with a clear Italian accent. "George, my friend, is that really you?" "Hello, Antonio," George said calmly. "I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I need your help with something." "Anything for you, George. Anything. What's wrong?" "I'm standing in front of a 2019 Ferrari with serial number F219GM 448. The one I designed for the American luxury market. The owner claims it was destroyed in an accident and is beyond repair. But Antonio, I'm looking at it right now, and this wasn't an accident. This was sabotage." The Italian voice on the other end of the phone went very quiet. "Sabotage? George, are you certain?" "I'm certain. Someone deliberately destroyed 3 key components in a very specific way. It's designed to look like catastrophic failure, but when you know what to look for, the evidence is clear." "Madonna Santa," Antonio breathed. "George, who owns this car now?" "A man named David Sterling. He runs a luxury dealership here in Phoenix." "Sterling?" Antonio's voice changed, became sharper. "George, we had problems with that dealership before. Insurance claims that didn't make sense. But we could never prove anything." There was a pause. "George, are you recording this conversation?" "I am now," George said, glancing at all the phones still pointed at him, along with about 50 other people. David Sterling looked like he was going to be sick. He tried to say something, but no words came out. Tyler had backed away slowly, trying to distance himself from his boss. "George," Antonio continued, his voice now very serious, "I'm going to need you to send me photos of everything you're seeing. And George, I'm going to call our legal department right now. If what you're saying is true, this is fraud. Very serious fraud." "I understand, Antonio. I'll send the photos in the next few minutes." "And George, that engine, can it be repaired?" George smiled for the first time that afternoon. "Antonio, you know how I build things. This engine could run for another 500,000 miles. It just needs someone who knows how to fix it properly. Then show them, my friend. Show them what a real engineer can do." George hung up and looked at David Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, before I repair this engine, I need to know something. How much did the insurance company pay you for this totaled vehicle? David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's none of your business. $2.1 million. Maria's voice cut through the silence. She had finally stepped outside, and she was holding a folder. I processed the insurance paperwork myself, Mr. Sterling. I remember because it was the largest claim we'd ever filed. Everyone turned to look at Maria. David's eyes went wide with recognition. You work here. You're his granddaughter, Maria said firmly. I've worked here for 3 years, and I've watched you treat people like dirt that whole time. But I never imagined you were also running insurance scams. The crowd erupted. People started talking all at once. Several people were frantically texting or calling someone. One woman said loudly, "I'm calling the police right now." Wait, David said, holding up his hands. Everyone just calm down. This is all a misunderstanding. No, George said quietly, but his voice carried authority that made everyone stop and listen. It's not a misunderstanding. You destroyed this Ferrari deliberately. You filed a fraudulent insurance claim. You collected over $2 million. And then you used that money to expand your business while keeping the totaled car as a trophy. George walked back to the Ferrari and knelt down beside it. But here's what you didn't understand, Mr. Sterling. Every engine has a signature. When you build something with your own hands, you know it. You know every part, every measurement, every detail. And you can tell when someone has tampered with it. His hands moved over the engine with renewed purpose. He started reconnecting wires, realigning components, checking systems. The crowd watched in complete silence now, mesmerized. For 43 years, George said as he worked, I designed engines for Ferrari. I trained hundreds of engineers. I received awards from automotive organizations around the world. I helped create engines that powered cars that won races, that broke speed records, that made people feel alive. He paused and looked up at the crowd. But you know what I'm most proud of? I'm proud that in all those years, I never cut corners. I never lied. I never cheated. Because at the end of the day, your work is your signature. It's how the world knows who you really are. Tyler, the salesman, suddenly spoke up. His voice was shaky. Mr. Martinez, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. The things I said to you were mean, George finished for him. But you were following your boss's example. That's what happens in places like this. The person at the top sets the tone for everyone else. He returned his attention to the engine. His hands moved with the confidence of a master craftsman. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The crowd stayed, completely captivated now, watching a true professional at work. Finally, George stood up and wiped his hands on a cloth someone had handed him. Mr. Sterling, would you like to start the engine? Or should I? David didn't move. He couldn't. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and everyone was watching it unfold. I'll do it, George said. He climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life. The sound of that Ferrari engine was like thunder. It was powerful, smooth, and absolutely perfect. The crowd gasped, and several people actually started clapping. The engine that 5 mechanics had declared impossible to fix was running like it had just rolled off the factory floor. George let it run for a full minute, letting everyone hear the proof of what real expertise sounds like. Then he turned it off and climbed out of the car. He looked at David Sterling, who had gone completely pale. Mr. Sterling, George said, his voice still calm but carrying a weight that made everyone lean in to listen. I want you to understand something. When you humiliated me today, you made a choice. You chose to judge me by my age, by the truck I drive, by the clothes I wear. You chose to make me the punchline of your joke. David tried to speak, but George held up his hand. But here's what you didn't know. While you were filming me and laughing, while your employees were making jokes, while hundreds of people online were sharing videos of your entertainment, you were also confessing to insurance fraud. You admitted on camera that 5 mechanics declared this car totaled. You mentioned the insurance money. You created a permanent record of your own crime. The reality of the situation was starting to dawn on David. His phone was still in his hand, still recording. He looked down at it like it was a snake. Turn that off, someone in the crowd said quietly. Everything you say now will make it worse. But the damage was done. In the age of cell phones and social media, there was no taking it back. The videos had already been shared thousands of times. The live stream had been recorded by viewers. George's phone call with Antonio had been captured by multiple people. 2 Phoenix police officers arrived, having been called by someone in the crowd. They listened to George's explanation, examined the engine damage he'd pointed out, and made several phone calls. Within an hour, more people arrived. Insurance investigators, FBI agents specializing in fraud, even representatives from Ferrari's legal department who had caught a flight the moment Antonio called them. David Sterling was arrested that evening. As they led him away in handcuffs, he didn't say a word. What could he say? The evidence was overwhelming, and all of it had been gift-wrapped by his own arrogance. Tyler and 2 other salespeople were also brought in for questioning. It turned out they had known about other suspicious insurance claims, but had stayed quiet because the dealership paid well. Their silence had made them accomplices. But this story isn't really about David Sterling's downfall. That was just justice taking its natural course. This story is about what happened next. The videos of George went viral, and I mean truly viral. Within 48 hours, they had been viewed over 20 million times. But something interesting happened as they spread. The narrative changed. At first, people shared them because they loved seeing an arrogant rich man get what he deserved. But then people started focusing on George himself. On his dignity. On the way he kept working quietly despite the mockery. On the moment when he revealed who he really was. "This man is a hero," one popular comment read. He didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He just proved them wrong with his actions. Other retired professionals started sharing their own stories. A former aerospace engineer talked about being dismissed by a car mechanic who assumed he didn't know anything because of his age. A retired surgeon shared how a young doctor had patronized her at a hospital. A master carpenter described being treated like he was incompetent by a hardware store employee. George's story became a symbol. It represented every older person who had been dismissed, every skilled worker who had been judged by their appearance, every expert who had been underestimated because they didn't look the part. News outlets picked up the story. George was invited to appear on morning shows, news programs, and podcasts. At first, he declined all of them. "I just want to go back to my quiet life," he told Maria. But Maria convinced him otherwise. "Grandpa, think about all the people who saw those videos. Think about the young people who are learning that knowledge and dignity matter more than appearance. You have to tell your story." So George agreed to one interview, a long-form conversation with a respected journalist who promised to treat the story with the seriousness it deserved. During that interview, George said something that resonated with millions of people. "I've learned that dignity isn't about demanding respect. It's about being so secure in who you are that other people's opinions can't shake you. David Sterling tried to humiliate me, but he couldn't because I knew my worth. I knew what I'd built in my life, and no amount of mockery could change that." The journalist asked him what he wanted people to take away from his story. George thought for a moment. "I want people to understand that everyone, and I mean everyone, has a story. That person serving your coffee might be a retired executive. That janitor might be a veteran who served their country. That elderly person you're ignoring might have built things you use every day. Treat everyone with respect, not because of what they can do for you, but because respect is what every human being deserves." The interview was viewed 30 million times. It was shared in schools, played in diversity training sessions at companies, and referenced in speeches by leaders around the world. But for George, the most meaningful moment came a week later. He was at his local grocery store when a young man, maybe 25 years old, approached him nervously. "Mr. Martinez," the young man said, "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm a mechanic, and I've been dealing with customers who treat me like I'm stupid because I work with my hands. But after seeing your story, I realized that I should be proud of my skills. You inspired me to go back to school for engineering." George shook his hand warmly. "That's wonderful. What's your name?" "Carlos." "Well, Carlos, let me tell you something. This world needs good engineers. People who understand that excellence comes from dedication and pride in your work. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for being skilled at something." That conversation, that moment of connection, meant more to George than all the media attention combined. 6 months after that day at Sterling Luxury Auto, George Martinez sat in his garage, which had been transformed into something beautiful. It was now a proper workshop, with tools organized on the walls, several car bays, and most importantly, a classroom area where 8 young people sat listening to him teach. The Ferrari Corporation had reached out to George personally. They offered him a generous consulting contract, which he politely declined. Instead, he asked them to fund something else, a scholarship program for young people from low-income backgrounds who wanted to study automotive engineering. Ferrari agreed immediately. They created the George Martinez Engineering Scholarship, offering full tuition, housing, and living expenses to 10 students every year. The first class had already been selected, 10 kids from across the country who had demonstrated both talent and passion for mechanical work. But George wanted to do more. He wanted to teach in his own community, to reach kids who might not even know that engineering was an option for them. So he opened his garage every Saturday for free classes. His students came from all walks of life. There was Marcus, a 17-year-old who lived with his single mother and had been told by his school counselor that he should consider more realistic career options. There was Jennifer, a 15-year-old whose father was in prison and whose teachers had written her off as a troublemaker. There was David. Yes, another David, who was 12 years old and so smart it scared him because he didn't think smart kids looked like him. George taught them more than mechanics. He taught them precision, patience, and pride in their work. He taught them that excellence has nothing to do with where you come from and everything to do with the effort you're willing to put in. Maria watched her grandfather transform these kids' lives and felt her heart swell with pride. She had been promoted to general manager of the dealership, renamed Phoenix Premium Motors after new owners took over, and she made sure that the culture there reflected the lessons her grandfather had taught her. Tyler, the salesman who had mocked George, had gone through his own transformation. He was now the dealership's community outreach coordinator, working with local schools to create automotive education programs. He visited George's garage regularly, often bringing potential students with him. "Mr. Martinez," Tyler said during one visit, "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did that day." "Tyler," George replied kindly, "you already have. You learned from your mistake, and now you're helping others. That's all any of us can do. Learn and grow, and try to leave the world a little better than we found it." The wrecked Ferrari that George had repaired became a permanent display at Phoenix Premium Motors. It sat in the main showroom with a plaque that told the whole story. Customers would stop and read it, many of them taking photos. Some would come back later with donations for George's scholarship fund. As for David Sterling, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts of insurance fraud and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His empire collapsed, his assets were seized, and his name became synonymous with arrogance and corruption. But even that isn't the end of his story. 2 years into his sentence, David sent George a letter. It was short and handwritten. "Mr. Martinez, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I destroyed my life through my own arrogance and cruelty. But I wanted you to know that I think about that day constantly. About how I treated you. About what kind of person I had become. I'm working with the prison counselor, trying to understand how I became someone so terrible. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, truly sorry, for what I did to you." George wrote back. Not to offer easy forgiveness. What David had done couldn't be erased with a simple, "I forgive you," but to acknowledge the courage it took to write that letter. "Mr. Sterling," George wrote, "the fact that you can recognize your mistakes is the first step toward becoming a better person. I hope you use your time in prison to truly examine your life and your choices. And I hope that when you get out, you'll find a way to contribute positively to the world. That would be the best apology you could offer." Marcus, the 17-year-old student, was accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. Jennifer discovered a talent for electrical engineering and was recruited by Tesla for their apprenticeship program. Young David, only 12 when he started, was already being courted by automotive companies who heard about his innovations in fuel efficiency. One Saturday, as George was teaching his class about engine design, a journalist asked if she could observe. She was writing a follow-up story about the impact George had made. After the class, she asked him a question. "Mr. Martinez, that day at the dealership, did you know it would lead to all this?" George smiled and shook his head. "No, I just knew I had a choice. I could respond with anger and make the situation worse, or I could respond with dignity and show them who I really was. I chose dignity." "What would you say to other people who face discrimination or mockery?" George thought for a long moment. "I'd say this. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. It's determined by what you build, what you create, what you give to the world. David Sterling tried to tear me down, but he couldn't because I had spent a lifetime building something real. Build your life on a foundation of honest work, integrity, and dignity. Then nothing, no insult, no mockery, no prejudice, can destroy what you've created." The journalist wiped her eyes. "That's beautiful." "It's not beautiful," George said gently. "It's just true." Today, George Martinez is 73 years old. He still teaches every Saturday in his garage. He still answers calls from Ferrari engineers who want his advice. He still drives that same old Chevy truck, though now it's running perfectly because Marcus rebuilt the engine as his final project. The garage has a sign above the door now. It was a gift from his students, made by hand in the shop. It reads, "The Martinez Workshop, where dignity, knowledge, and hard work build the future." And every Saturday morning, when George arrives to teach, there's a line of students waiting to learn from the man who proved that true greatness has nothing to do with age, race, or wealth, and everything to do with character. Because that's the real lesson of George Martinez's story. Not that the arrogant get punished, though sometimes they do. Not that justice prevails, though sometimes it does. The real lesson is simpler and more powerful. Be so secure in who you are that no one can shake you. Build your life on integrity. Treat everyone with respect. And when people try to tear you down, respond with dignity. Because in the end, dignity always wins. If this story touched your heart, remember to share it. Not because it's entertainment, but because somewhere, someone needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. That their skills matter. That their dignity matters. That they matter. And if you've ever been underestimated, mocked, or dismissed, keep building. Keep creating. Keep showing the world who you really are. Just like George Martinez did.